Huh? Hello. Hello. Good afternoon. Okay. Okay. Good morning for those I want to wish a good morning. Yeah, I'm sorry about the little mix-up, but we are ready to start. We have a great session for this morning, those that wanted to be in the morning, but getting into the afternoon. We're talking finance, and we're privileged to be honored with the presence of very important dignitaries, honorable ministers, and the rest of you distinguished colleagues and guests. And I will not take too much time. I will immediately request that we have the opening statement from Honorable Minister from Egypt, Professor Sawilan, to just come and kick us off on this occasion. Professor, welcome. My name is Oswald Chanda. I'll read the deliberations.
So, good morning. Excellencies, Honorable Ministers for Water and Sanitation representing different African member states, the Director for Water Development and Sanitation Department and the African Water Facility at the African Development Bank, representatives of international development agencies, representatives of our partners including the civil society organizations, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Let me begin by welcoming all of you to this session, which is focusing on a very important topic, innovative financing mechanism towards achieving Sustainable Development Goal number 6 in Africa. Allow me to express my gratitude and appreciation to the African Development Bank for convening this session jointly with AMCOW. This session provides an opportunity to analyze water and sanitation sector financial mechanisms in Africa. Excellencies, honorable ministers, ladies and gentlemen. Only 7 years are remaining before 2030 to achieve SDG 6. This session therefore provides us with an opportunity to take stock of the progress made over the past years. It also gives us a chance to consider the lessons that we learned in the implementation of SDG 6. We need to understand what's working well and also where are the challenges, especially on water and sanitation sector financing. I am also glad to see that this session provides an opportunity for governments and financial institutions as well as the private sector to share knowledge and experience to help us chart the way forward for achieving SDG 6 in Africa. I would like to call upon our speakers, panelists, and all of us in this room to look strategically at what we should do differently in the next 7 years to achieve the ambition and bold targets for the 2030 agenda. As we are all aware, the reality is that the development goals for poverty reduction, food security, education, health, and energy, among others, cannot be achieved without sustainable water resources management, reliable water supplies, and improved sanitation. Excellencies, honorable ministers, ladies and gentlemen, I'm also glad that this session is taking place after the 13th AMCOW General Assembly held in last June in Egypt, which was attended by over 40 ministers responsible for water in Africa. During the assembly, the AMCOW Governing Council, among many others, noted the need for urgency to facilitate action on achieving the water and sanitation goals of the continent. In addition, this session is also very important as it takes place while we have nearly 2 years remaining before the expiry of the Africa Water Vision 2025. Under Africa Water Vision 2025, launched at the beginning of the new millennium, we agreed on a vision of an Africa where there is equitable use and sustainable management and development of water resources for poverty alleviation, socio-economic development, regional cooperation, climate resilience, and environmental protection, and where there is universal access to safe water supply, sanitation, and hygiene services. The Africa Water Vision 2025 also included a commitment of an Africa where there is an adequate number of motivated and highly skilled water professionals, and there is a political will, public awareness, and commitment among all for sustainable water resources management, including the mainstreaming of gender issues and youth concerns, and the use of participatory approaches. I want us also to be looking at how have we financed initiatives aimed at building the required capacity of our youth for the water and sanitation sectors in Africa. The attainment of this commitment, which recognizes the role of youth, creates an important building blocks towards the achievement of African Union Agenda 2063, the Africa we want. I'm also glad that over the past years, we have seen the political will to bring water and sanitation issues at the center of socio-economic development in Africa. Since the Sharm el-Sheikh Declaration for Accelerating the Achievement of Water and Sanitation Goals in Africa, adopted by the heads of states and government of the African Union at the 11th Ordinary Session in 2008, in Egypt, we have seen more and more government prioritize issues of water and sanitation at different levels. Allow me also to seize this opportunity to shed light on Egyptian tremendous efforts in achieving substantial progress in terms of safe drinking water and sanitation services coverage. Our vision in national water and sanitation sector strategy is universal access to inclusive, affordable, reliable, and safe water supply and hygiene sanitation, circular economy and resilience, net zero carbon neutral 2050, and financially viable and sustainable service. And the strategy prioritize our water resources availability and efficiency, improving drinking water sector governance, financial sustainability, and operations efficiency, improving assets management and investment planning and delivery. Also improving the level and quality of services, including bringing the access gap in rural sanitation, behavioral change at end user and water and sanitation companies, improving services delivery and customer accountability. This is in addition to encouraging culture change amongst consumers by increasing the water use efficiency through expansion in the installation of household water meters, decrease the loss in potable water network, use the water-saving fittings, and media awareness plans for water conservation. Last but not least, allow me also to commend the African Development Bank, the World Bank, the OECD, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and all other financing institutions for technical and financial support provided to African governments. I would like to urge you to also continue support the AMCOW work program as we work jointly to achieve the vision and aspirations for Africa. With these remarks, allow me once again to express my gratitude to you for coming to this session. I wish you very fruitful discussions on this very important topic. Thank you very much.
Your Excellency, thank you very much for those words and for kicking us off in this discussion. You have highlighted some very important elements, the need for leadership, which you have demonstrated as African ministers. You know, you have established a body that guides how Africa should move to meet these targets. That's great leadership. And you have made the strategically linkages, you know, coming to the African Development Bank, asking that we house some of your initiatives. And that is very, very commendable. You have mentioned an element that I have seen in this conference, and the need to train youths, the need to train young people. You know, I wonder how many young people we have in here. I can see a few, but yeah. There is one young person here. It's very critical for continuity. It's very critical for us to run with the required zeal and speed to have young people with us. Now, our program this morning, we're going to have some presentations that demonstrate and show what is happening on the continent. Some presentations that will highlight just some of the ambitions, some of the great work that is being done, and the pathway for reaching the SDG 6 on the continent. Now, we are in a race. The way we run the first lap is not the same way we're going to run the last 2 laps. We need different strategies. The minister pointed to that. We need to do things differently. And here we are looking at the financing mechanisms, and we're saying, how shall we do this differently? We invite your comments, we invite your views, as we'll invite at some point a distinguished panel of members that have greatly engaged in this business of financing at various levels: project preparation, collection of information, implementation, evaluation, and so on and so forth, that are going to just help us bring out some of the elements that we need to take on board as we think differently, as we take a more strategic approach to financing access to water and sanitation. At this point, I would like to invite a presentation that is going to be made regarding information, the data system. AMCOW has developed an information system that informs what is happening in each country, you know, and they are able to give a picture of the progress that is being made in each country. So we're going to have that presentation. The presenter is going to do it virtually. Yes. So we will see the presentation, but please take notes and we can get feedback. You see, COVID has taught us many good things, you know, including doing things like this. You don't have to be right in the room to make a presentation and be asked questions. Okay, so our IT friends are helping us. Okay, thank you. Hello?
Okay, good morning. Hello?
Hi, Patrice, how are you?
I'm fine, sir.
Okay, so you ready for us?
Yes.
Okay, so we give you 10 minutes to present?
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
Okay, now, in the interest of time, let's try and respect the 10 minutes, and we'll greatly appreciate that. Please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Good morning, Excellency. Good morning, all. So I have the opportunity to present what we are doing at AMCOW. For this presentation, we will not maybe focus on the data, might have another session, but on the next level, on the capacity development program that we are planning to implement, that we are developing from the data that we receive from our member state. So my name is Patrice Lemeni. I'm in charge of the monitoring and reporting at AMCOW Secretariat in Abuja. So we conducted a need assessment last year in 6 member states. So the need assessment was based. The objective was to sample to access the capacity of our member state requirement to strengthen the national level data system for decision making. So the need assessment, we assess the use to determine the systemic and institutional, including the ICT and the human capital requirement. So this was the objective of the need assessment. So why do we conduct this need assessment? So we prepare, as you know, we received a mandate from our head of state to report annually on the state of water and sanitation in Africa. And from the report that we have prepared annually, so there are some gaps that are frequent that we notice from our member states. So for instance, last year, from the last year campaign 2022, these are the gaps that we noticed. So we noticed that around 38% of our member states, 38% of our member states report around 50 to 75% of the data that we are reporting we are using for the reporting, and only just few of them, around 7 member states, that have been able to report around 75 to 100%. So when we deep dive into what was or what are the issue of our member state, why are we not receiving more than 75% of the data for most of our member states? So we noticed there were some systemic or institutional issue that we might need to tackle to have more information from our member states. That's why we conducted this. We sampled the need assessment within 6 of our member states around our 5 regions. So the need assessment cover these 6 countries. We conducted assessment in Senegal, in Cameroon, in Sao Tome, in Tanzania, and in Madagascar. So from the assessment, the assessment shows that there's some inability in access of information from our member states. So around 49% of the required information is available by our member states. So our objective is, from the result of that assessment, we want to see how we can fill that gap, the gap that have been identified from the assessment. And also, we noticed from the assessment that there's a low prioritization of research, knowledge creation, and development to improve the water wisdom. The assessment also highlight that there's some insufficient information within our member state to report on the progress. So we noticed that there were 2 teams under the WASMO, the team on the water resource management, on the climate change and disaster risk reduction, that there were a lot of data gaps. So we could not even report the information from that team this year. We also noticed from the assessment that there are some inadequate coordination within our member state, and then a systemic challenge that we have the inadequacy of primary data collection and the capacity constraint to analyze the information. So these are the gap that we identified during the assessment, and then these are the proposed game changer as a result of this assessment. So we noticed we are proposing to improve in coordination, sharing, and operational linkage within our member states to strengthen the national coordination to operationalize the coordination mechanism within our member states, and the funding also. So we are talking about the funding. So many of our member states, there is a lack of the funding to support some of the activities. So support them in terms of mobilizing the funding, and also some effective solutions. So we target some specific intervention to fill the data gap. So all these proposed game changer, this is what we are proposing into the next capacity development program that we are developing to tackle this gap that we noticed into the capacity, into the need assessment. So from the origin of this capacity development program that we are preparing is the outcome of the need assessment. The program also will build from the proposal that we submitted to Africa Water Facility. We submitted was a 3-year proposal, 2013-2017, that we submitted to AFDB around 2017, and we had a decision from our governing council that is it. And also this year, during the 13th General Assembly, we have been mandated by our minister to finalize the elaboration of this program and to address the capacity constraint at the member state level. So this is the background of why we are preparing this program. And now this program, the objective will be to strengthen the national level data system for decision-making and evidence-based policy, and also to strengthen the coordination mechanism within our member state, to strengthen the regional and the continental M&E system by 2030 for our member state. And at least during the UN Water Conference this year, there were this presidential compact. So we want at least a new 5 countries that have signed the new presidential compact. This is part of the objective we want to achieve for this program, and also the coordination of the program within the members. So implementing this program within our members, it will help us to improve the quality of the data that we are collecting annually. So as the next step, we are planning to finalize this program as mandated by our minister, and also conduct the resource mobilization for this activity. So thank you. This is what we have prepared regarding this the capacity development program. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patrice. Patrice is responsible for M&E at the AMCOW Secretariat. He is running the WASMOS program, which seeks to develop capacity and collect information from the countries, so that we are informed. We know where we are and where we'll be getting to, and which countries will be able to meet the SDGs and which ones are going to fall short. So great job. Stay online. We have not set you free yet, Patrice, so we'll come back to you with some questions if need be. Okay? Now, we want to look at the issue of finance, investments, and we're going to have our next presentation. This is live. Okay, MJ. Okay. Mchera Chirwa is the coordinator at the Africa Water Facility. Now that some of you might not know what the Africa Water Facility is, I talked about the leadership of the ministers of water in Africa. They realized the gap that is there in having bankable projects and they mooted the idea of the African Water Facility, saying we need to have ready projects, projects that can then be financed. And they requested the Africa Development Bank to set up the Africa Water Facility, to manage on their behalf the Africa Water Facility. And the Africa Water Facility has been up since 2006, and Mchara Chirwa is the coordinator for the Africa Water Facility, and is going to tell us a little bit about what we need to do so that we can get the financing needed for the Sustainable Development Goals on the continent. The 66 million gap, what do we do? Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Oswald. Oswald is my director, so I appreciate the opportunity. Your Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, I'll share a presentation that looks at financing mechanisms. It will share some perspectives on some of the drivers of demand and the challenges that we face in Africa to finance infrastructure, and particularly water. Also the scale of the challenges that we have to close the financing gap, some trends, and some pathways that we think are essential to consider in order to scale up financing investments in SDG, in the water and sanitation sector to achieve SDGs, and also some new elements that we think will be critical going forward to achieve some of the objectives that we want to achieve. So this, I'm sure, would not be surprising to most of us here. The drivers for the risks that we have in terms of water in Africa, and I'm sure globally as well, relate to population growth. Particularly for Africa, we have a very high rate of population growth. I think this is a well-known fact, expected to double to 1.5 billion by 2050 in urban centers, but also growth expanding in rural areas. This is also impacted, of course, slow economic growth that was impacted by the COVID pandemic, but beginning to pick up again in a number of countries post-COVID. And then at the same time, we're having to deal with the challenges imposed due to climate change, climate variability causing extreme impact on our resources, availability, and access. Again, the scale of the challenge that we have facing us in WASH, also numbers that might be familiar to a lot of you in this room, but important to reflect upon and help to inform how we move forward. So the number of people lacking access to basic drinking water in excess of 400 million, access to sanitation in excess of 700 million. And by 2030, for us to achieve the SDG targets, we need significant increase in financing in all these areas. Estimates show that we need a 12-time increase in the current rates to achieve access to safely managed drinking water, 20-time increase to achieve safely managed sanitation targets, and 42 times the increase just for basic hygiene. I mean, these are astronomical challenges or targets that need to be closed. But there are things that we can do to move in the right direction to increase financing and to increase access. The water sector financing gap or investment gap in Africa, again, Some of these numbers are a bit dated, but they demonstrate the trend. The Infrastructure Consortium for Africa, which is also hosted by the African Development Bank, publishes a report annually on infrastructure financing trends, and it tracks financing. The 2019 report showed a 13.3 billion financing in 2018 for water sector in Africa. I can say that 2019 showed a drop to 10 billion. I'm sure the data beyond that will also show, a drop as a result of the COVID pandemic and also the global financial challenges currently ongoing due to conflicts around the world and climate change impacts. So, very high financing gap. We need to mobilize about between 43 and 53 billion annually to reach anywhere near closing the financing gap in Africa for water and sanitation, and anywhere near closing the SDG targets that are before us. An example of one of the financing instruments in the African Development Bank, this is the African Development Bank window. As you may be aware, the African Development Bank has got the African Development Bank group has got several financing windows. The ADB window shows, the chart shows the trend over the past several years in terms of financing for the water sector. It reached a peak in 2016 with 1.2 billion, and then 2018, 1 billion financing for water, but on average you will not, a trend of around 500 million annually being invested. And this is just one source. Obviously, there are other DFIs, the World Bank, the European Union, and other regional investment banks also financing the sector. But I'm sure their figures would also show trends that indicate not an increase, because really what you ought to be seeing is an increase over the years to enable us to close the gap. So at this rate, this remains a challenge. Some of the pathways that we believe are important to increase access to finance for the sector. This talks to project preparation, this slide, and talks to the work that we do in the African Water Facility, set up again as an initiative of the African ministers to increase availability of bankable projects. There's always the saying that financing for good projects is always there, but it's the good projects that are lacking, so our role is to try and scale up. So we need to invest more in project preparation. That's a simple message. The more good projects that we have, which take into account all the key elements required to enable investments, will help us to mobilize more investment in the sector. The other challenge that we need to think about is in terms of allocation of resources to achieve SDGs. The pathway we are putting forward here is that we need to bolster financing in other aspects other than WASH in order to improve access to finance in most of the countries in Africa to achieve the SDG. So the SDG requirements require different sources of resources of financing, but also targeting all the different elements that are required to achieve the financing targets. Another pathway is resources that are available out there, from climate funds. We need to find ways to access those resources for the sector by demonstrating the impact that the sector has in improving resilience and mitigating the impacts of climate change. And this speaks to, finding ways to blend financing from public and private resources and a number of the new innovative financing instruments that are available out there. And I'll talk a little bit more on this in the subsequent slide. The issue of information has been talked about just previously, but also it's about being aware of the trends, building capacity, ensuring adequate policy frameworks in our countries to be able to access and channel resources in the most critical areas to make the impact that we need. Now, going forward and looking at where we're coming from with the challenges, we need to adopt an approach that targets both public resources, private resources, and innovative financing instruments, and be able to blend all these sources of finance to achieve the targets that we need. What is key also is to improve efficiency and creditworthiness of our utilities and service providers in our countries. That's a key source of revenue that can be reinvested in new supply and new recipients of services in our countries. It's clear that domestic resources, financing from national governments, remains the highest source of financing for most of our infrastructure needs in Africa. This has to continue. And then access to guarantees from DFIs like the African Development Bank, the World Bank, and other partners will help to lower the cost of financing for the sector. And also facilitate blended financing and also investment from the private sector. This we see as the way forward to enable mobilizing more investment in the sector going forward. One example that we like to share is the Kigali bulk water project, which actually was financed through blended financing instruments from different partners and is now operational. But this is but one example where we can structure financing to achieve an objective, and similar arrangements can be made in other countries. That's the end of the slide, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mchera, for that presentation. Now, I am very interested in those three gears. The big gear, that's the government financing, and it says it should continue. No, it should not just continue. We need efficiency. We need effective delivery of the government resources because it will act as a catalyst for the other resources, even for the other gears to grow a little bigger. So if we can increase the efficiency in the use of the government resources, then we will be in a better position to attract a lot more resources. So we always thinking about ways of increasing resource mobilization and bringing more resources to the table. Now, the last presentation, we are going to get from the OECD. The OECD has committed itself to a lot of policy dialogue, proposing policies that help in increasing delivery. And Odifano, who is a policy analyst at OECD, is going to make a presentation and just help us think through what we need to put in place in order for us to mobilize these additional resources to reach the SDGs. Over to you, Odi.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Oswald. Good morning, everyone. Excellencies, Honorable Ministers, dear participants. So first of all, I'm very grateful for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here on behalf of the OECD to discuss these key topics with you, particularly because we are currently working quite closely with the African Development Bank and the Africa Water Facility on financing water in Africa, and I'll explain later how. My presentation is well aligned with the presentation of the coordinator of the Africa Water Facility, so I won't spend too much time on it. I'll start explaining why I think that having this discussion on innovative mechanisms to finance water in Africa today is crucial, with a few words on the very challenging current context in Africa. And I'll then focus on some of the solutions to scale up innovative mechanisms to finance water in Africa, explaining that achieving SDG 6 in Africa is not merely about attracting more money, but also about making efficient use of the money available and existing assets. So, So why this discussion on innovative financing mechanisms for water in Africa is more than timely? And why is it so important to sit together today and discuss this topic? So we are 7 years from the 2030 agenda, and Africa is far from being on track to achieve SDG 6. There's a strong economic case for investing in water in Africa. It's estimated that the continent is losing around 5% of its GDP each year due to lack of water, polluted water, or poor sanitation, while the amount of loss due to drought and floods can range between 5 to 25% depending on the year. So there's a strong economic case to invest in water in Africa, but this strong economic case does not translate into a financial case. So as explained just before by the coordinator of the Africa Water Facility, achieving SDG 6 by 2030 in Africa would require an increase in investment rate by 12 to 45. What's interesting here is if we, 12 to 42, sorry. Here, if we compare with the average at the global level, which is around 3 to 6, we see that it's much more in Africa. Achieving SDG 6 would require an additional 43 to 56 billion per year. At the same time, the financing situation is extremely challenging. ODA flows to Africa have decreased recently. According to the IMF, they have decreased from 54 billion in 2020 to $45 billion in 2021. And according to the OECD, there was a fall in ODA to Africa of almost 8% in 2022. Economies also have to deal with more expensive and more difficult access to financial market, according to the IMF. And there are also issues around rising public debts, liquidity issues. To take an example, with a figure, debt represents 56% of the sub-Saharan GDP, a level not seen since the debt crisis in the early 2000s, according to the IMF. So African economies are also facing very strong inflation. In February 2023, the median inflation rate in sub-Saharan Africa was around 10%, more than double the rate at the start of the pandemic, again taking the figures of the IMF. So we need to sit together to be bold and propose some solutions. And speaking about solutions, there are many. So first, on the role of development finance. Financing needs are far beyond what bilateral and multilateral finance are currently covering. And ODA for Africa is currently concentrated on some countries, sometimes failing to reach other countries. So we need a shift, and development finance could strengthen the efforts put more efforts on mobilizing domestic resources and regional resources. For instance, trying to see how to best use the power of national development banks, regional development banks, domestic commercial banks for water, and for instance, also focusing on developing a robust enabling environment for water investments and robust national water policies. So I will detail this a bit later in my presentation. Just briefly on the question of debt, just coming back to this quickly with a very short parenthesis on debt. A significant share of development finance is provided to countries as loans, raising questions over its role to support countries facing financial liquidity and solvency issues. A key challenge is the need to reconcile the objective of responding to countries' financing needs, exacerbated by the current context, while ensuring countries' debt sustainability. So there are discussions ongoing around the global financial architecture and the role of development finance. There is work ongoing, including from the Global Commission on the Economics of Water, trying to provide the scientific evidence that water should be classified as a global common good. And some voices suggest that some new financial windows could focus on global public goods. The idea is if we manage to provide the scientific evidence that water should be considered as a global public good, then water can access these potential new pockets if they are created. So that was on the role of development finance. Now on the enabling environment for water investments. At the OECD, we do research on the enabling environment to attract investment in the water sector. So a strong enabling environment for water investments can be broadly characterized as a set of policies, regulations, institutional arrangements that facilitate investment in activities that contribute to water security. To strengthen the enabling environment and thus attract more investment to water, including private investment, we see key dimensions. Under these key dimensions, there are a lot of sub-criteria, qualitative, quantitative indicators. So just to explain very briefly, the first one is around the investment framework in the country in general. The second one is whether water policy framework are attractive for investors. This includes many things, but particularly the importance of the economic regulation of water to enable the strengthening of the financial viability of the sector and the creditworthiness of water utilities. This includes, for instance, implementing efficient water pricing mechanisms, making sure that pricing is cost-reflective and that those who can afford to pay are paying the right price for water. Incentivizing performance in service delivery, putting in place performance-based contracts with service providers, carrying out regular performance reviews of service providers, etc. The third one is around a pipeline of good projects. It's on whether water projects are attractive for investors and sustainable. A very important point here is around project planning and strengthening the capacity of governments to plan long-term on water and identify a pipeline of sustainable and bankable projects to present to investors, but with a long-term perspective. For instance, those are my projects in the coming 10 years on water. And it also includes, for instance, policies and regulations to incentivize innovation for water projects. And the fourth one, which is also really important, is around taking an economy-wide water lens. We need to take an economy-wide water lens to solve the water crisis because water is part of the solution to several crises: climate change, food security, energy security, biodiversity loss. So the idea is to make sure that policies and decisions taken for other sectors integrate water-related issues. In other words, it's to incentivize other sectors to measure and mitigate their impact on water resources. So how to do that? Well, there are economic instruments, regulations, policies that allow to incentivize other sectors to take water into account in their investment choices and to ensure they compensate for the opportunity cost of using water. Fiscal incentives to incentivize companies to decrease their impact on water. Economic instruments to incentivize water reuse. Public procurement guidelines for water consumption and pollution reduction. Food and soil protection, etc. So now, so that was on the enabling environment for water investments and the research we do at the AFDB on that. Now moving on to the question on the potential of blended finance. So the implementation of blended finance mechanisms for water is lagging behind if we compare to other sectors. It represents a very small share of blended finance mechanisms. The water sector is representing a very small share of blended finance mechanisms compared to other sectors. And how to scale it up? So we see many actors from philanthropies, development finance, doing transaction, grants, subsidies, concessional finance in the water sector in Africa. The landscape is sometimes fragmented, and we think we could gain a lot from making a better use of existing concessional resources, grants, subsidies, so that they are better targeted to leverage private investment, to foster PPPs, using risk-sharing instruments, political risk instruments, partial risk guarantees. We could gain a lot from, in terms of scaling up blended finance, from pooling projects, which would allow to provide commercial investors access to a variety of different transactions in the sector, mitigating concerns around small ticket size, risk exposure, transaction costs, etc. So tailoring blended finance mechanisms to the local context is also important. And it's related to previous messages on the use of finance to mobilize and leverage domestic resources. So I was mentioning earlier in my presentation that the AFDB is working quite closely currently with the African Development Bank and the Africa Water Facility on financing water in Africa. So we are jointly convening the 10th meeting of the Roundtable on Financing Water. It will take place in Abidjan on 22-23 November and also online. We will discuss many of the topics that were mentioned today and many others, such as water-related risks and implications for financial institutions in Africa, financing universal access to sanitation in urban and rural areas, investing in water for growth and development, energy, agriculture, urban development. So please join the OECD and the African Development Bank in discussing these key issues and pushing the boundaries of traditional thinking about financing water-related investments in Africa. We need your expertise and your political leadership to come up with bold and ambitious solutions to reach the 2030 targets. If you want to join, to participate in person, there's an expression of interest form that I can share with you, that we can share with you if you're interested, and the online meeting will be open. So my email address is here if you want to, that I forward the invitation. So thank you very much for your attention.
Audrey, remain here, please. Don't go away. Don't go away. Please remain here for further discussions. Now, let me invite the other panel members who are going to help us now look into this issue of innovative financing. One of the elements that is very, very critical that needs also to be looked at when we're looking at financing is the whole issue of climate change, you know, and the resources that are available from climate financing agencies. Okay, we put this one here and that one there. Okay. Let me invite Honorable Minister, Carl Sletwin, the Honorable Minister Herman Gustav of Agriculture, Water and Land Reforms in Namibia. We're very honored to have this minister because he has worked in the Ministry of Finance as a minister. So he understands the issues we're talking about here. And so it's a great privilege and honor to have you, Honorable Minister. If you could take the first one. And we have the World Bank, represented by Joe Coker. Now, Joe Coker is the Global Lead for Water and Finance. Now, Joe is an institution in himself. You know, if you have known and met people from the water sector and financing at the World Bank, you have met Joel. and he is going to help us think through a number of initiatives and studies that they have done and the impact and how we can use those in increasing finance. The next panelist, or the last panelist now, is Brian Arbogast from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. He's the Director of Water and Sanitation and Hygiene, and he is a friend of the water sector and has done quite a lot. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation have done quite a great deal of support in trying to raise some of the areas that have been ignored, particularly sanitation. We have a huge gap. Over 800 million people have no access to sanitation. And the Bill and Melinda Gates are doing a fantastic job in ensuring that we change the narrative in the sanitation space. So he is also joining us to talk about how philanthropic agencies or bodies can help make a difference. Now, I'm very happy that Aude, who made the last presentation, is here as a lady. Let me move away from this stage and leave them as we have the discussion. Aude, could you just come and stand here? I need a mobile microphone, please. Okay, thank you very much. So we're going to have a discussion now. The scene has been set. The Honorable Minister gave us a very instructive opening remarks, and we would now like to delve into some of these details that are going to help us come up with some pointers, as we look for solutions for innovative financing. Let me begin with JOA, the institution. The Water Finance Institute.
Not sure I'm happy with that title.
All right. Okay. What are some of the challenges that you see in scaling up financing for the water sector, particularly focusing on commercial and private finance in the water sector, from your experience? And what are some of the opportunities that we can use at domestic level, to exploit that potential to scale up commercial and private finance?
Thank you, and thanks for this session. It's incredibly timely, and I would argue it's one of the most important sessions that we have this week, because the question has been laid out, we're way behind our targets, okay? So the first thing is, the answer is not about private money, it's about private and public money. It's about resources, full stop. Second point I want to make is the supply of money, whether it's blended finance, whether it's bonds, whether it's microfinance, whether it's climate finance, which is arguably one of the most misunderstood terms in finance, because climate finance is simply money that is being used on mitigation or adaptation or address climate issues. It is not a different kind of money. But despite all those supply-driven solutions are open to us in the water and sanitation sector. They're only available if we achieve one word, and you've already mentioned that, and that is creditworthiness. And I really want to focus on this, and I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, but I really do believe as I've done this, I'm more and more convinced that this is the heart of the issue. So how can we become creditworthy so we can not only convince a bank to come in and fund us, but also the Ministry of Finance to come in and fund the water sector? We're not seeing the resources we need from the public sector, and if we're not getting public sector money, how are we possibly going to bring in private sector money? So let's focus on the how for a minute, and you've already alluded to this. Two things. Our service providers, whether they're sanitation providers, utilities, local government, irrigation agencies, they have to be technically and financially efficient. We're blessed in the water sector because we have key performance indicators. We know what that means. If your non-revenue water is 40%, stop right there. You are not going to be efficient, and that's what we need to focus on. If your collection rate is only 60%, stop. That's where we need to focus. technical and financial efficiency is one thing, but that's the easy one. And it's not easy, don't get me wrong. It takes years. This is not the kind of, dealing on technical and financial efficiency is not bringing in a consultant to spend 2 weeks and have a conference. You need to sit in a utility, you need to sit in local government, and you need to work there for years. And if I have any institutional credibility, it's because that's what I did in my career. And arguably, while it's wonderful to be in Stockholm, I have to tell you, spending years in Harare and Kenya were the best part of my career, and that's the best work we can possibly do. Sitting in a utility, sitting in a local government, and making it work. Technical and financial efficiency. But that's not easy, but that's fun. The hard part, which is even more fun, is the governance, policies, institutional, and regulatory issues. We need transparency, we need clarity, and we need to do that with integrity. So, technical and financial efficiency, policy, institutional, and regulations, it takes a lot of time. With those two things, we can start to get the revenue. And very few things in the water sector are very clear, but one of them is our sources of revenue. We talk about the 3 T's. I'm not so keen on that term anymore. I think there's a different 3 T's, and some of you have heard me say this before. So we have tariffs, and we spend a lot of time in this sector arguing about tariffs, but that is one of our sources of revenue. Second source, and the only other source, is really taxes. And if we're not going to get the money from tariffs, we have to get the money from taxes. And if we don't get those 2 resources, we go into the 3rd T, which is just trouble. And that's where we are. We're in trouble because we don't want to raise taxes. And I want to be very clear, I am not here advocating that we raise taxes. I am here advocating that if we do not have taxes that cover our O&M and any kind of debt service or whatever we owe to the Ministry of Finance, then the only other source of money is taxes. And we have to get that squared away. This is going to take a while. We're not going to do it very quickly. But we need to get in there, we need to make our providers more efficient, and we need better governance.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. And that's, can we give a round of applause? Thank you. Honorable Minister, Joe has rightly pointed out the key role that the public sector plays in setting the scene and in ensuring that we have a framework that attracts financing, or that ensures that there's efficiency in financing. From your perspective, sharing Namibian experiences, how do you see policy, institutional, regulatory framework influencing or strengthening the case, for financing in the water sector? Reforms in institutional, regulatory, as well as policy in countries. How does that help improve the pathway to increasing financing in the water sector? Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Well, financing the water sector and sanitation is complex, as was said by you. Thank you very much for that. Now, let me just zoom in on some of the experiences where we find some conundrums that we are pushed into. Let me start with the tax conundrum. We are asked as the public sector to supplement funding through public funding, taxes, and that has to be done to de-risk the projects. As soon as you increase your taxes, your investors will say, well, you are not a conducive investment home. So you are less attractive for investments, so we will not go to you. And I think that is why I believe the T for tax is in need of some massaging to see how we can achieve that without being set up to fail. The second conundrum we are in is what I call economic stabilization. Investors will come, the financiers will come and say, if you properly want to de-risk this project, you must assure revenue, that's the rate of return. You must carry the exchange risk. You must guarantee project execution. You must guarantee, and you may not change your regulatory framework that has any impact on the rate of return of the project financier. Now, you must appreciate that the water sector is it's a resource sector, but it is by and large a social development sector. You have to make living standards for people better. Sanitation, clean water. And it is the most urgent for the poorest of the poor. Now, if you want to make a regulation that spurs on the development of that sector, you are prevented from it because it will eat into profits. So the whole scenario that public-private partnerships are the silver bullet, in my opinion, hinges on how much profit do we have to fund as the public sector or as consumers. And let me give you one example that happened in Namibia. We had a gas field discovered. It needed funding for development. Now, the guarantees and the securities that we have to give would result into a tariff that was 3 times the tariff that we are currently paying. It would close all the doors for alternative power generation using solar and alternative green solutions. So we couldn't accept it, but we were castigated to say, you are not developing a resource that is available to you. So it's a problem that project costs and the resulting tariffs and contributions by the private sector will overwhelm you, and you are not able to fix that conundrum. The last point I want to make is answering the question, is there money available? I believe money is not the problem. If we look what we spend on wars and we hold that money for water development, we would be smiling. And what is the return on investment on war? I just read that Ethiopia needs 20 billion to fix what they have destroyed during the war recently. Now, 20 billion for the whole continent would be fine. So it is a government's decision where to spend the money and what to do with the money. So money availability is not a problem. I think there are therefore, we are not talking about it often, but I think that is one of the crux of the matters. What are the priorities that governments set to spend the money for? Domestically, we have to fund education, health, infrastructure, transport, all that. And I think we have taken water availability and the need for sanitation for granted. If we develop a town or a city, we say, well, water will have to be brought to us. That it is a cost, we forgot. Again, in Namibia, we have good and bad examples. We have built schools where there's no water, there's no sanitation possible. Now we have to use the most costly option to satisfy the demands at that school. So, and the last example is a good example. Is it possible? And I believe yes. Namibia, through its green hydrogen initiative, which is a complex new project development, we managed from initiation to signing the agreement, the pilot agreement, less than a year. So it is possible, and there are finances available, and they are mainly private financing, and the project has a good rate of return. So it is possible in spite of all that. Thank you.
Congratulations. Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. That is record. In one year, to close the deal on the hydrogen deal, it's commendable. But also the issue of prioritization, it's quite very, very key. And I know that Namibia has highly prioritized water, because you are an example of how you are reusing, wastewater in domestic use. It's really commendable. Odi, how can we use concessional financing to ensure that we create the enabling environment, to attract additional financing?
So there are several ways. One of them is to use concessional finance to support public policy dialogues to help countries identifying the strengths and weaknesses of policies, regulations in terms of attracting investments in the water sector, and to strengthen the financial viability of the sector and the creditworthiness of utilities, which is key. To give a concrete example of that, in Senegal, the French Development Agency supported and is still supporting the state of Senegal in implementing its water and sanitation policy via a public policy loan. So that's an example of how concessional finance can be used to improve water governance in countries and to strengthen the enabling environment. So in our research also at the ACD, we've developed a scorecard to assess the enabling environment for water-related investments. We are currently working with in Asia with the Asian development banks in 7 countries, analyzing at the country level the policies and regulations to attract the enabling environment to attract investment in the water sector. And we also work pilot testing the tool in Eastern Europe. We are a member of the core group of the IIP-PIDA Water Investment Scorecard, and we look forward to cooperating potentially in African countries. So work with the idea is working with government representatives in the countries, national water experts, gathering information and to assess the strengths and weaknesses of the enabling environment, and then really to provide policy recommendation and advise on water policy reforms to really strengthen this enabling environment.
Excellent. So that complements what the minister was saying, because then you address the wider issues of taxation, the wider issues of ensuring that you don't disrupt the macros in the fiscal space. Excellent. Brian, how can philanthropic funds, be used to help crowd in private finance in the water sector, or indeed helping improve efficiency and financing in the water sector?
Great. Well, I think a good role for philanthropy is to be a catalyst for positive change and for accelerating change. One thing we think about at the Gates Foundation is how do we use our dollars to catalyze a future that we don't think would otherwise happen if we didn't spend in that way. And I'll give 2 examples, pretty different examples. One, probably many people in this room have heard of the vision of reinventing the toilet. And that was really started off as this idea, can you have a completely different approach to sanitation where all the waste is being treated in a closed loop that doesn't require sewers or septic tanks or emptying trucks. And that was maybe a bold, crazy idea in the category of things that probably have a very high likelihood of failing. But that if they were to succeed, could dramatically change what's possible. And so After spending over the past 11 years over $250 million in upstream R&D, we actually are now seeing the fruits in terms of really some transformative products. If you go to Johannesburg, for example, right now, you can see 3 different community reinvented toilets in schools and in very low-income communities. And what these do is they basically are closed-loop systems that treat all the waste on-site, kill all the pathogens, clean up the water for the next flush. So, for example, one unit started with no fresh water, got a tanker truck to bring a tanker truck full of dirty water, and within a couple of days, that became the clean water with no smell, no pathogens, clear water in the toilets that was kickstarting the system. So these systems can be, very, very powerful new tools, and that's one example. Those are the community reinvented toilets. We expect we'll see household reinvented toilets within the next 2 years. A very different example might be some of the work that we've done in support of the African Water Facility. So with this vision of an African urban sanitation investment initiative, how could we crowd in and attract investors to really be dealing with, addressing the very problems we've been talking throughout this entire session? Well, we realized that to attract those investors, they would want to see a pipeline of available bankable projects on day one. And so we use some of our grant funding to build up, do the project preparation, or to support AWF doing the project preparation, to build that pipeline so that you now have a very exciting investment initiative that we think will have a higher opportunity to attract investors. So those are just a couple of examples.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, no, that's very good, and we've seen it in practice. Joe, you have done a lot of work, and I just want to commend you for that. Knowledge work, managing and collecting information and disseminating that information. How can we use knowledge work, to help in scaling up investments, particularly in the sanitation space?
Thanks. Well, we've all done a lot of work, so if we've been able to initiate some of this, it's with the support of a lot of different partners, both at the very local level, but also in terms of other multilateral development banks and some of the other organizations that are even here. But I think there's a key thing. The knowledge work is not about the paper. Papers can sit on the shelf, as we know. The key thing is to take them off the shelf, go to the place the problem is, and make it work. And there's not one piece of paper that you can use that's going to solve all those problems. But I do want to go back to what I think are the 2 main solutions to try to get there, which is the efficiency of our providers, no matter what they are, whether it's collecting tariffs, whether it's there's staffing issues. We know if you have 20 employees per 1,000 customers, we know your labor costs are going to be very hard. That is a tough, tough issue. There's not a piece of paper that's going to tell you how to solve it, but there are examples from other places, and there have been documents about how to deal with that. And all of the issues that we've had, we have that experience. On the other side, on the governance, there's a lot of papers. We've produced something around policies, institution, and regulations. On the utility turnaround, we've done the utilities of the future work. We have creditworthiness courses online, but all of these have to be taken, localized, adjusted, talked through with the key counterparts, and then only then do they work at the local level with a lot of leadership. And that leadership doesn't always have to come from the politicians, can also come from the technicians.
No, thank you. Thank you very much. That's very true. We need to turn this paper into action by ensuring that the people that use it internalize it. I'm back to you. Policies and investments. How can we use this research work? A lot of research that has been done by the OECD. How can we translate that into investment cases for the private sector?
So I mentioned previously our research on the enabling environment. I won't repeat it again, but just to say that I really agree on the need to adapt it to each country at the national and local levels. So it's really what we're doing, working in countries with the national experts, the local experts. So really agree on this point. So that was on the enabling environment. If I give another concrete example, it's a research we do on the financial materiality of water risks. The coordinator of the Africa Water Facility started this presentation talking about the rise of water risks. According to the IPCC, in the world, 99% of financing is going in the wrong direction. 99% of investments are increasing our vulnerability and exposure to climate and water risks. So if research helps investors to understand the exposure and vulnerability to water risks of corporates, of financial institutions, at the macro level or at the micro level, there is a chance that investors also better understand it and redirect their investment into more solid investments, and including investments that are actually decreasing our vulnerability and exposure to water risks. So that's where research can also help. I mentioned a bit also the research around the roundtable on financing water, and I just wanted to add that, yeah, we work with the African Development Bank, but also with the World Bank, the World Water Council, and the government of the Netherlands. So that's how I think research can really help.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. Honorable Minister, in closing, we know that there are many cases we can learn from Namibia. You know, that you have been leaders in many fronts. You have a PPP for wastewater treatment, and the case that I talked about. What incentive systems? I know you made reference to this, but are there any particular incentive systems that you can point to that can help in increasing private sector finance? Now, I'm not just looking at external private sector. I'm looking at the local private sector as well. And I'm not looking at the bigger cities only. I'm also looking at the local sanitation, the rural areas. Are there any incentives to attract or to bring the private sector into those water and sanitation spaces?
Well, it's a difficult question in as much as our set of incentives that we have rolled out are broad sets of incentives that talk to all investors, whether domestic or foreign. And there are a host of tax incentives where we allow write-offs of equipment, capital, the normal write-offs for spurring on development. We have incentives in terms of providing the basic needs, that is land and water. When a mine, for instance, comes to Namibia, the government takes the obligation and we say, wherever the mine is, we bring water to you. Wherever the mine is, we build a road to you. How we finance it, whether you are part of the financing, that is another story, but we upfront say, you should not shy away from opening the development because of lack of infrastructure. So we make infrastructure available. That's for power, for water, and for transport. Those are the basic needs. So they are broad. But I believe that one other thing that often is not talked about is the quality of life where you invest in. And we are fortunate that Namibia offers high quality of life. We have political stability, we are safe, we are having a lot of things you can do in your free time in Namibia. We have good schools, good private hospitals, medical facilities. So the service provision on the social side must be intact, and that alone is a strong incentive to bring investors there. And I'm saying it because, and I think the OECD can confirm, if you look at investment flows into Africa, governance doesn't play a role there. It's resource availability that plays the role. Most investments go where the resources are. And that is regardless whether there is good governance or bad governance. That's where it goes. So I think we need to also make sure that in as much as we have to realize that governance and how well we are structured to be a transparent, accountable public sector, we have to not ignore the existing trends and see how we can influence it, that we give effect to what we actually want to achieve. That is an open and transparent society. Namibia is, again, not too bad. We are the freest press. We are actually beating the UK too. And it is good, you know, it is good, it is rewarding if the public sector is judged by the press, and we are not afraid of them. We don't jail them. We actually invite them and say, you must tell us where we go wrong. That's the principle of democracy, and I think that is one of the strongest incentives that you can actually give, that you are not afraid of being brought to the book.
Thank you very much, Your Excellence. Great insights and great work being done in Namibia. In closing, 30 seconds, Brian, any last word regarding innovative financing, supporting the initiatives of the public sector so that we meet the SDGs?
Well, I think the one thing that we see today that we might not have seen in past years in Stockholm is just, I think there's a lot of alignment, certainly on the sanitation front that I'm most familiar with, around the concepts of citywide inclusive sanitation, around the ways we need to engage together. I think, you know, I was at a climate resilient sanitation session this morning where, frankly, many of the other people in this room were at. So people are singing from the same songbook. And I think the idea of really focusing on the infrastructural changes that need to happen so that you can pull in, whether it's more philanthropic dollars, more private sector dollars, and make more out of all the dollars that pour into the system. We're just seeing a lot more innovation than we have in the past and alignment, so it's great to see.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. What's your last word, Joel, for this session?
Roll up your sleeves and get to work.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Odi?
No, I think everything has been said very well on my side, and I just say, like, please join us in Abidjan for the 10th meeting of the Roundtable on Financing Water, and we try to really continue the conversation on these topics.
Thank you very much, and I think this panel deserves a round of applause. They have done a fantastic job bringing out some great insights that I think, if followed, Coca's words, can help make a difference and make progress towards attaining the SDG 6 in Africa. Thank you very much, and I'm signing off now. For those that are online, that are following us online, thank you for participating, and all the best for the rest of the week.